This 4-year-old beggar girl was pushed into a mud puddle, but a millionaire saw everything and took justice into his own hands. Comment what you think is going to happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The Tuesday rain fell relentlessly on the sidewalks of Harmony Creek, turning the streets of the small town in Pennsylvania into a maze of puddles and mud. Susan Parker adjusted the piece of plastic over her daughter's head, trying to protect her from the icy drops that insisted on finding their way through any opening. Lily, only 6 years old, shivered against the wall of the town's farmers' market, her big brown eyes watching the movement of people coming and going with their purchases, all hurrying to escape the downpour. "Mummy, I'm hungry," the girl murmured, pulling at the hem of her mother's worn dress. It was the 3rd time she had repeated the same phrase that morning, and Susan felt her heart clench with each request. At 28, she'd never imagined she would be there, with her young daughter begging for change in front of the market where she used to shop when she still had a job at the local textile mill. "I know, sweetie. We'll get something today. You can trust Mommy," Susan replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her dark hair, plastered to her wet face, betrayed sleepless nights and the exhaustion of someone who no longer knew where to find strength. The sound of an engine caught both their attention. A shiny black car pulled up near the market, and 4 young people stepped out, all wearing expensive clothes and sneering smiles. Lily instinctively hid behind her mother when she realized they were walking towards them. "Well, well, what do we have here?" said the tallest of the group, a blonde boy of about 17, pointing to Susan and Lily. "The market beggars. What a depressing sight." "Leave them alone, Ryan," murmured another young man, but his voice was drowned out by the laughter of his companions. Ryan moved closer, his white sneakers contrasting with the dirt of the wet ground. "You know, you're blocking the entrance to the market. Customers are uncomfortable seeing this." Susan firmly held Lily's hand and tried to move away, but the group surrounded them. "Sorry, mister. We're just trying to get something to eat. We're not bothering anyone." "Not bothering?" Ryan laughed loudly. "Look at you. Dirty, smelly, begging at the market entrance. It's embarrassing for our town." Lily began to cry softly, squeezing her mother's hand tighter. The desperate sound of the child seemed to amuse the boy even more, who bent down to her level. "Oh, the little one is crying. Too bad," he mocked, before raising his hands and pushing Lily hard. The girl lost her balance and fell directly into a huge mud puddle that had formed in the gutter. The dirty water completely soaked her already tattered clothes, and the impact made her let out a scream of fright and pain. Susan rushed to help her daughter, but she herself slipped in the mud, falling next to Lily. The young people burst into laughter, some even taking pictures with their cell phones. "Now you're in the right place," Ryan said, enjoying the scene. "In the gutter where you should always be." Across the street, inside a white car, Mr. Jonathan Harding witnessed the whole scene with growing indignation. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. At 45, the businessman had seen a lot of cowardice in his life, but this crossed all lines. Jonathan turned off the engine with a brusque movement and got out of the car, slamming the door hard enough to draw everyone's attention on the street. His determined steps cut through the rain like a knife, and when he got close to the young people, his voice echoed with an authority that made everyone turn around. "What kind of upbringing did you have to treat a child like this?" he asked, his dark eyes fixed on Ryan. The boy laughed, clearly not intimidated by the older man's presence. "And who are you supposed to be? The protector of the town's bums?" "I'm someone who won't stand by and watch a child be humiliated by spoiled brats," Jonathan retorted, moving closer. "You're going to apologize to them right now." "Apologize?" Ryan chuckled, looking at his friends. "Are you hearing this? This old guy thinks he can give us orders." Jonathan's patience ran out completely. Without warning, he placed both hands on Ryan's chest and pushed him with all his might, making the young man fall exactly into the same mud puddle where Lily had fallen moments before. The boy was completely soaked, his expensive clothes now covered in smelly mud. "Now you know what it's like," Jonathan said, extending his hand to help Susan and Lily get up. "Get out of here before I do something worse." Ryan got up furiously, wiping the mud from his face. "You don't know who I am, you idiot. My dad's the mayor of this town. You're going to regret what you just did." What Jonathan didn't know at that moment was that those words would carry much more weight than he could imagine, and that his impulsive act of defending an innocent child would unleash a series of events that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Ryan Miller emerged from the mud puddle, his face twisted with rage, his designer clothes completely ruined. His friends helped him up, but none of them dared to laugh at the situation. The mayor's son of Harmony Creek was not used to being humiliated, much less in public, in front of people he considered inferior. "You have no idea what you've just done," Ryan snarled at Jonathan, pointing his finger at him. "My dad will ruin you. He'll shut down all your businesses one by one. I'll personally make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." Jonathan remained impassive, helping Lily clean the mud from her face with a handkerchief he took from his pocket. The girl was still trembling, but her big eyes showed a mixture of fear and admiration for the man who had defended her and her mother. "Threats don't scare me, kid," Jonathan replied calmly, without taking his eyes off the child. "And if your father is half the man he should be, he'll be more concerned with the upbringing he gave his son than with revenge." Susan watched everything in silence, torn between gratitude and terror. On one hand, no one had ever defended her and Lily like that. On the other, she knew that people like Ryan Miller had the power to destroy entire lives. The fear of retaliation consumed her, but something in Jonathan's firm posture reassured her. "Sir," she said hesitantly, lightly touching Jonathan's arm, "thank you for what you did, but maybe it's better if we leave. We don't want any more trouble." Ryan overheard and laughed with disdain. "That's right, Beggar. You better run before things get much worse." The word beggar was like a slap in Susan's face. She had lost everything: house, job, dignity. But she had never considered herself a beggar. She was just a desperate mother trying to feed her daughter after being unfairly laid off from the textile mill where she had worked for 5 years. "You're not going anywhere," Jonathan said firmly, placing himself between Ryan and the two. "And you, ill-mannered brat, are going to learn what respect is, whether you like it or not." Ryan made a move to approach again, but his friends held him back. "Leave it, Ryan," one of them whispered. "There are too many people watching. Better to sort this out another way." The young man backed down, but his eyes promised revenge. "You don't know who you're messing with, Jonathan Harding," he said, spitting the name as if it were poison. "Yes, I know who you are, the owner of the bakeries. My dad knows you very well, and after today, he'll know you even better." Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine upon hearing his name pronounced with such hatred, but he showed no sign of intimidation. There was something in Ryan's tone that suggested deeper knowledge, connections he didn't fully understand yet. After the young people left, Jonathan turned to Susan and Lily. The rain had lessened, but both were still soaked and shivering with cold. Lily was holding her mother's hand tightly, looking at Jonathan with childish curiosity. "You need to dry off and eat something warm," he said, taking off his coat and placing it over Lily's shoulders. "I know a place near here." Susan hesitated. Accepting help from strangers had always been difficult for her, especially after everything she had been through. But looking at Lily, who wouldn't stop shivering, she knew she had no choice. "We don't want to be a bother, sir," she murmured. "You've already done too much for us." "No bother at all," Jonathan replied, already walking towards his car. "And my name is Jonathan, Jonathan Harding. I'm Susan, and this is my daughter Lily," she said, following him hesitantly. Lily looked up and smiled shyly. "Thank you for helping us, Mr. Jonathan." The girl's innocent smile touched something deep in Jonathan's heart. For 3 years, since his father had passed away, he'd been immersed in a melancholy that insisted on consuming him. Seeing that child smile despite all the adversity she faced awakened in him feelings that he believed to be dormant forever. During the ride to one of his bakeries, Jonathan watched mother and daughter in the back seat through the rearview mirror. Susan kept Lily close, stroking her wet hair while whispering words of comfort. There was a dignity in her that transcended her difficult circumstances, something that sparked his curiosity and respect. "May I ask how you got into this situation?" he questioned carefully, not wanting to seem intrusive. Susan sighed heavily. Before answering, "I worked for 5 years at the town's textile mill. I was a good employee, never missed work, never caused problems. Until one day the supervisor said I was being laid off. They said it was cost-cutting, but there were other issues involved." "What kind of issues?" "I had discovered some irregularities in the payroll. Employees being paid for hours they didn't work. Money disappearing from funds earmarked for benefits. When I questioned my supervisor, Barbara Fuller, she said I was imagining things." Jonathan frowned. The name Barbara Fuller sounded familiar to him, but he couldn't quite place where he knew it from. "And are you sure about these irregularities?" "I am. I've worked with numbers for years. I took a technical accounting course. I know when something doesn't add up, but no one wanted to listen, and 2 weeks later I was out on the street." "And Lily's father?" Susan was silent for a long moment. "Lily never met her father. He passed away before she was born. Since then, it's always just been the two of us." Jonathan realized he had touched on a painful subject and changed focus. "And don't you have any family here? Someone who can help?" "We don't have anyone. My parents passed away when I was a teenager, and I never had any siblings. It's just me and Lily against the world." Jonathan's bakery was on Main Street, one of the busiest in downtown Harmony Creek. It was a modest but well-kept establishment, with windows displaying fresh bread and homemade pastries that made anyone's mouth water. Lily pressed her face against the car window when they arrived, her eyes shining at the sight of so much food. "Can I have a pastry, Mommy?" she asked innocently, without imagining that her simple question would deeply touch the hearts of both Susan and Jonathan. "You can have as many as you want, my princess," Jonathan replied before Susan could say anything. "Today you are my special guests." "No." As they entered the bakery, none of them noticed the black car watching them from afar, nor did they notice the man in the suit making notes in a small pad. Ryan Miller's revenge was already beginning to take shape, and the consequences of Jonathan's courageous act would prove far more dangerous than he could have imagined. The interior of Jonathan's bakery exuded the comforting aroma of fresh bread and cinnamon. Lily walked between the shelves with wide eyes, as if she had entered a magical world. She had never seen so much food together in one place, and her empty stomach growled loudly in the face of so many temptations. "Mrs. Davis," Jonathan called out to the middle-aged woman who was arranging the sweets on the counter, "prepare a nice snack for our visitors, and see if there are dry clothes in the storage room, the ones we keep for emergencies." Mrs. Davis, a stout woman with a welcoming smile, observed Susan and Lily with a maternal gaze. She had worked for Jonathan for over 10 years and knew her boss well. She knew that behind the serious facade, he possessed a generous heart that couldn't ignore the suffering of others. "Of course, Mr. Harding. I'll prepare everything in the corner in the back, where they can change and be more comfortable." While Mrs. Davis took care of Susan and Lily, Jonathan went to the small office in the back of the bakery. He needed a few minutes to process everything that had happened that morning. His life, which had followed an established routine for years, had been completely shaken by an impulse to protect an unknown child. Sitting at his desk, he looked through the window that overlooked the back of the establishment. There was a small backyard with some fruit trees and a space that could easily be adapted for a child to play. The idea popped into his head before he could even control it. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Robert, his accountant and friend for almost 20 years. "Jonathan, I need to talk to you urgently," Robert said bluntly. "I just received a call from City Hall. They want to reschedule the inspection of your 3 bakeries for tomorrow morning, all at the same time." Jonathan frowned. "That's very strange, Robert. The inspection was only scheduled for next month, and normally they do one at a time." "That's right, and there's more. The inspector who's coming is known for being, let's say, very thorough. Paul Bennett. He finds a problem even in a glass of water." The connection formed in Jonathan's mind immediately. Ryan's threat was already being put into practice, faster than he had imagined possible. The mayor's son really had the power to mobilize the public machine against him. "Robert, do you know this inspector?" "I know him by name. They say he has close ties to the mayor's office." "Jonathan, what did you do to attract this kind of attention?" Jonathan quickly recounted the morning's incident, omitting only the most specific details about Susan and Lily. Robert sighed heavily on the other end of the line. "My friend, you messed with the wrong guy's son. Godfrey Miller isn't known for forgetting offenses, and his son Ryan is protected like gold." "I don't regret what I did, Robert. That child was being humiliated. Any decent person would have done the same thing." "I know, and I admire your attitude, but now we need to prepare for the consequences. I'm going to review all the bakery. Documentation tonight. We can't allow for any problems." After hanging up, Jonathan returned to the main area of the bakery, where he found a scene that touched him deeply. Lily was sitting at the small table in the corner, wearing dry clothes that were a little too big for her, eating a powdered donut with her eyes closed in pure pleasure. Each bite seemed to be savored, as if it were the most delicious thing in the world. Susan, also in borrowed dry clothes, watched her daughter with tears in her eyes. It was the first time in weeks that she had seen Lily truly happy, eating her, Phil, protected from the cold and rain. "She's glowing," Jonathan commented, approaching the table. "Thank you," Susan said, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know how to repay your kindness. It's been a long time since anyone has treated us with such dignity." "Mommy, this donut is better than the ones in my dreams," exclaimed Lily, smeared with sugar, making Jonathan smile genuinely for the first time in months. "I'm glad you're enjoying it, Princess," he replied, sitting down at the table with them. "May I ask where you're living?" Susan lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "We don't have a permanent place. Sometimes we manage to stay in a temporary shelter. Other nights we sleep on the street. It depends on what we manage to collect from begging." "That's no life for a child," Jonathan said, looking at Lily, who was now playing with making drawings with breadcrumbs on the table. "I know," Susan sighed. "Every day I wake up hoping that our situation will improve, that someone will give me a job opportunity. But without a fixed address, without current references, it's almost impossible to get a job." An idea began to form in Jonathan's mind. It was impulsive, maybe even irresponsible, but he felt it was the right thing to do. "Susan, can I make a proposal?" She raised her eyes, curious and apprehensive at the same time. "I need someone to help here at the bakery, someone who understands numbers, who can take care of the administrative part, and you need a place to stay. In the back of the bakery there's a small apartment that I don't use for anything. It's simple, but it has everything you need." Susan was silent for a long moment, processing the proposal. It was too tempting to be true. and her life experience had taught her to distrust overly generous offers. "Mr. Harding, that's too much generosity, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," he replied firmly. "It's work. You would have a salary, responsibilities, hours to keep, and I really need help with the bureaucratic part of the business." "But you don't even know me properly. How can you trust me with your money?" Jonathan looked at Lily, who had stopped playing and was listening attentively to the adults' conversation, even without fully understanding what it was about. "Any mother who protects her daughter, the way you protect Lily, who maintains her dignity even in the worst circumstances, is someone I can trust," he said. "Besides, you mentioned irregularities at the mill where you worked. Someone with your technical knowledge can help me keep everything in order here." "Can I really live here, Mommy?" Lily asked innocently. "Can I play in that backyard I saw through the window?" Her daughter's question was like a stab in Susan's heart. How could she deny the girl the chance to have a real home, security, stability? But at the same time, how could she accept so much generosity from a man she had met only a few hours ago? I need to think," she said hesitantly. "Of course," Jonathan replied. "But in the meantime, how about you stay here today? At least until the rain passes completely. Lily can play in the backyard, and you can take a look at the accounting books, see if it really would be a job you would like to do." It was at that moment that Mrs. Davis approached the table with a worried expression on her face. "Mr. Harding, there's a man outside taking pictures of the bakery. He's been there for half an hour, writing things down in a notebook." Jonathan got up and walked to the window. Outside, a man in a grey suit was meticulously photographing the facade of the establishment, paying special attention to the license plates and the general condition of the building. "The revenge has already begun," he murmured to himself, feeling a chill in his stomach as he realized that he had completely underestimated the power and influence of the Miller family. Susan noticed the change in Jonathan's expression and approached. "Any problem?" "Maybe," he replied, watching the man who was now heading towards an official City Hall car. "But don't worry, we'll solve everything." What Jonathan didn't know was that this was just the first of many photographs that would be taken of his businesses in the coming weeks, and that the decision to help Susan and Lily would place him at the center of a much more complex web of corruption and revenge than he could have imagined. Night fell over Harmony Creek. With a deceptive calm, Susan had agreed to stay with Lily in the small apartment in the back of the bakery, but only for one night, she insisted. Pride still struggled against need, even as she saw her daughter's happiness exploring every corner of what she called our new little house. Jonathan couldn't sleep. He paced back and forth in his apartment, located on the upper floor of one of his other bakeries, thinking about the possible consequences of his impulsive action. He knew stories about the Miller family, about how Mayor Godfrey had consolidated his power in the city over the years, but he had never been directly involved in local politics. The phone rang at 2 a.m. On the other end of the line, a voice he didn't recognize spoke in a threatening tone. "Jonathan Harding, you made a big mistake today. You messed with the wrong people. If you're smart, you'll apologize to the mayor's son and send those 2 bums away from your bakery. Otherwise, you'll find out how this city can become a very uncomfortable place for your business." The call ended before Jonathan could respond. He remained holding the phone for a few minutes, processing the threat. He wasn't a man to be intimidated easily, but something in the tone of the voice left him genuinely worried. Not for himself, but for Susan and Lily, who were now involved in his personal war against the Millers. The next morning, the inspection of the 3 bakeries began punctually at 8 o'clock. Paul Bennett, the city inspector, arrived accompanied by 2 assistants and a checklist that seemed to have been specially enlarged for the occasion. Jonathan and Robert accompanied them, watching as every detail was scrutinized with excessive rigor. This shelf is 2 centimeters closer to the wall than the regulations allow, Paul noted at the Main Street bakery, measuring with a ruler he had brought especially for this purpose. This has never been a problem before, Robert protested. The regulations changed last week, the inspector replied with a cold smile. Don't you keep up with updates to city regulations? At the second bakery, they found problems with the ventilation, the positioning of the fire extinguisher, and even the color of the paint on the walls, which according to Paul was slightly off the standard established for food establishments. When they arrived at the third bakery, where Susan and Lily were staying, the situation became even more tense. Lily was playing in the backyard when she heard raised voices coming from inside the establishment. This apartment in the back doesn't have a license for habitation, Paul declared, examining the documents. It's a serious irregularity to use commercial space for housing. No one lives here, Jonathan lied. It's just a converted storage room. Then why are there women's and children's clothes in the closet? Why are there toys scattered on the floor? Susan appeared at the back door, holding Lily by the hand. She had heard the whole conversation and realized that her presence was causing problems for Jonathan. It's my fault, she said, approaching the group. My daughter and I were going through difficult times, and Mr. Harding offered us a temporary place to stay. If there's an irregularity, the responsibility is mine. Paul examined Susan from head to toe, a cruel smile forming on his lips. Susan. Parker, isn't it? I recognize you. Weren't you fired from Mrs. Fuller's mill for incompetence? Susan's face paled. I was fired, yes, but not for incompetence. Interesting, murmured Paul, making more notes. An employee fired for just cause being irregularly housed in a commercial establishment. That adds several other infractions to the list. Jonathan felt his blood boil. Leave her out of this. Any problem is with me. Ah, but now she's part of the problem, the inspector replied. Irregular use of commercial space, lack of a housing license, possible exploitation of labor. The list is growing. It was at that moment that Lily, frightened by the raised voices, began to cry. Susan immediately picked her up, trying to comfort her, but the girl sobbed loudly, repeating, I don't want to leave, between sobs. Look at that, Paul commented coldly. A traumatized child. That may indicate an unsuitable environment for a minor. It may be necessary to contact Child Protective Services. Don't you dare, Jonathan said, taking a step towards the inspector. Lily is protected and well cared for here. For now, Paul replied, putting away his papers. You have 48 hours to resolve all these irregularities. If you don't, all 3 bakeries will be closed until further notice. After the inspectors left, a heavy silence filled the air. Robert ran his hand through his hair, clearly worried about the situation. Jonathan, that was blatant harassment. Some of these regulations didn't even exist until last week. They're creating obstacles that are impossible to overcome in 48 hours. Susan approached Jonathan with Lily still in her arms. I need to leave, she said in a firm voice, although her eyes showed all the pain that this decision was causing her. My presence here is harming you. I can't allow you to lose your businesses because of us. No, Jonathan replied categorically. No one is leaving. We're going to find a solution. But how? You heard what he said. 48 hours to resolve irregularities they invented on the spot. Jonathan looked at Lily, who had stopped crying, but was still clinging to her mother's neck. The sight of that frightened child awakened in him a determination he hadn't felt in years. Robert, I need you to get me a meeting with someone from the local press, and I also want all the details about the recent changes in city regulations. We're going to expose this harassment. Jonathan, are you sure? This could make things much worse. They're already bad. I have nothing left to lose. That afternoon, while Robert worked on the legal aspects of the situation, Jonathan decided to learn more about Susan's story. They sat in the backyard while Lily played with some improvised toys that Mrs. Davis had gotten from her granddaughters. "Tell me about this dismissal from the mill," he asked. "What exactly did you discover there?" Susan sighed, watching her daughter play. "I worked 5 years in the accounting department of Barbara Fuller's mill. In the last year, I started noticing strange discrepancies in the payroll. Employees receiving payment for overtime they didn't work, amounts that didn't match the actual production. Did you document these irregularities?" "I documented everything, spreadsheets, copies of documents, time records that didn't match the payments. When I took this information to Barbara, she said I was seeing things where there weren't any. A week later, they invented some excuse and fired me. And these documents, do you still have them?" "Some. I kept hidden copies at home, but when we were evicted, we lost a lot of things." Jonathan leaned forward, interested. "Susan, don't you find it strange that the inspector today specifically mentioned Barbara Fuller, as if he knew your story?" She frowned, thinking about the observation. "Now that you mention it, it was very specific indeed, as if he knew exactly who I was and why I was fired. It's as if this whole persecution is coordinated. The mayor's son, the strict inspector, the specific mention of your former boss." Jonathan paused, a suspicion growing in his mind. "Do you think there might be a connection between City Hall and Barbara's mill?" Before Susan could answer, Lily came running to them, holding something in her dirt-stained hands. "Uncle Jonathan!" "Uncle Jonathan!" she shouted, using for the first time the affectionate nickname she had invented for Jonathan. "I found a little box buried under the tree." She showed a small, rusty metal box, clearly old, that she had discovered while playing at making dirt castles. Jonathan took the box, examining it with curiosity. "It must be from whoever lived here before," he commented, trying to open the stuck lid. "Let's see what's inside." When he finally managed to open the box, he found some papers yellowed with age, protected by a plastic bag. They were old documents related to the bakery land, contracts of sale from decades ago. "How interesting," Jonathan murmured, examining the papers. "These documents are from when my father bought this land, more than 20 years ago." But as he read more carefully, his expression changed. There was something in the documents that didn't match his memory of the story his father had told him about buying the land, and one of the names mentioned in the contracts was vaguely familiar to him, although he couldn't identify where from. "What is it?" asked Susan, noticing the change in Jonathan's expression. "I don't know yet," he replied, carefully putting the papers away. "But I think Lily may have found something very important." What none of them knew was that this small discovery would trigger a series of revelations that would connect Jonathan's past, Susan's present, and Lily's future in ways that none of them could imagine. The early morning hours found Jonathan, still poring over the documents Lily had discovered, a cup of cold coffee beside him and his eyes red with fatigue. The more he studied the papers, the more intrigued he became. There were significant discrepancies between what his father had told him about the purchase of the land and what was recorded in the original contracts. According to his memory, his father had bought the land directly from a local farmer who wanted to move to the state capital, but the documents showed a much more complex chain of transactions involving an intermediary company that had transferred the property for a suspiciously low value just days before the sale to his father. "Bennett and Associates, Inc., he murmured, reading the company name for the 10th time. There was something familiar about that name, a memory that insisted on remaining on the edge of his consciousness. The sound of small footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Lily appeared at the door of the makeshift office, still in her nightgown, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Uncle Jonathan, why haven't you slept?" she asked with the innocence that only children possess. I was studying the papers you found, Princess. They may be very important. Important how? Lily approached, curious. Well, sometimes when we keep old things, it's because they tell stories that we don't want to forget, or that we don't want other people to find out. Lily nodded seriously, as if she perfectly understood the explanation. Like when Mommy hides her papers in her purse so no one can see them. The girl's observation caught Jonathan's attention. What papers does your mother hide, Lily? The papers from her old job. She said they're important, but that some bad people didn't want her to have them. At that moment, Susan appeared looking for her daughter, stopping at the door when she saw Jonathan and Lily talking about documents. Lily, you shouldn't bother Uncle Jonathan so early, she said, approaching. She's not bothering me, Jonathan replied. In fact, she gave me an important idea. Susan, do you still have those documents from the mill you mentioned yesterday? Susan hesitated. I have some, yes. Why? I want us to look at everything together. The papers that Lily found, the documents you have from the mill. I have a feeling there may be a connection that we're not seeing. An hour later, the kitchen table of the small apartment was covered in papers. On one side, the old documents about the land. On the other, the spreadsheets and copies that Susan had saved from her time at the textile mill. Lily played on the floor nearby, building houses with wooden blocks, occasionally offering observations that surprisingly made sense. Look at this, Susan said, comparing two spreadsheets. This Bennett and Associates that appears in your documents. The name is familiar to me. How so? At the mill, some payments were made through third-party companies. One of them had a similar name. She flipped through her papers until she found what she was looking for. Here, Bennett Business Consulting. Received considerable monthly payments from the mill, but I could never identify what services they provided. Jonathan leaned over the spreadsheet, studying the amounts. How old is this? These records are from 2 years ago, but from the system codes, the payments had been being made for much longer. And you investigated this company? I tried, but whenever I asked about it, Barbara would change the subject or say they were confidential matters that weren't my business. Lily looked up from her constructions. Mommy, is it like those stories you tell me, where people do things in secret? Similar, sweetie, Susan replied, stroking her daughter's hair. Jonathan picked up his phone. Robert, I need you to do an urgent search for me. I want everything you can find about 2 companies, Bennett and Associates, Inc. and Bennett Business Consulting. After the call, he turned to Susan. You mentioned that you had suspicions about irregularities in the payroll. Can you give me more details? Susan organized her spreadsheets, showing patterns she had identified during months of work at the mill. Look here. Employees who supposedly worked overtime every day, but that I never saw stay beyond their regular hours. Payments for services that I couldn't link to any real activity of the company. And Barbara Fuller? How did she react when you questioned these things? At first, she said I was being too detailed, that there were some processes I didn't need to understand. Then she started to get annoyed, saying I was questioning her authority. And in the end... Susan paused. Her voice choked. In the end, she said I was creating problems where there weren't any, and that maybe it would be better for me to look for another job. And you never suspected that there might be a specific reason for them to fire you right after you discovered these irregularities? I suspected it, yes. But what could I do? A fired employee against an influential businesswoman in the city? At that moment, Jonathan's phone rang. It was Robert with information that would completely change the course of their investigations. Jonathan, you won't believe what I found. Bennett and Associates was dissolved 15 years ago, right after selling that land to your father. But here's the interesting thing. The main partner was Bennett Miller. Miller, as in Mayor Miller? Exactly. Godfrey Miller was a minority partner in the company. And there's more. Bennett Business Consulting, the company that received payments from the mill, has the same Bennett Miller as the owner. Only now he only uses his middle name in the documents. Jonathan felt like a complex puzzle was beginning to form in his mind. Robert, it means that the mayor's father sold that land to your father through his own company, and that years later another of his companies receives regular payments from the mill where Susan worked. Jonathan, I think you've stumbled upon something much bigger than a simple political persecution. After hanging up, Jonathan looked at Susan with a grave expression. We have a much bigger problem than we imagined. What do you mean? The persecution against me may not have started yesterday with the Ryan incident. It may have started the moment you came to work here with me, bringing knowledge about irregularities involving the mayor's family. Susan paled. Are you saying that they fired me from the mill not only to silence me, but also to prevent someone like you from having access to the information I possess? That's exactly what I'm saying. Lily, who had heard part of the conversation even without fully understanding it, approached the adults. Uncle Jonathan, are the bad people going to try to hurt Mommy again? The girl's innocent question cut Jonathan's heart. He knelt down to her level, holding her small hands. We're not going to let anyone hurt your Mommy, Princess, I promise. And are we going to keep living in the little house? Jonathan looked at Susan, seeing the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. We're going to continue being a family, Lily, no matter what happens. But that afternoon, when an elegant and seemingly sophisticated woman entered the bakery, asking to speak to Susan, everyone realized that the problems were just beginning. The woman introduced herself as a customer, but there was something in her eyes that suggested very different motivations. Susan Parker, she asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. What a surprise to find you here. I'm Barbara Fuller. The silence that followed was charged with tension. Susan stood paralyzed, while Jonathan immediately positioned himself beside her. Lily, playing near the counter, stopped what she was doing when she sensed the change in the atmosphere. Barbara, Susan murmured, her voice barely a whisper. I came to buy some bread, Barbara said casually, but her eyes examined every detail of the environment. And what a coincidence to find my former employee working here. I hope you're adjusting well to the new work environment. The sarcastic tone didn't go unnoticed by Jonathan. How can I help you, Ma'am? Ah, you must be Jonathan Harding. I've heard a lot about you recently, Barbara replied, her smile becoming even more false, especially about your generosity with people in need. The tension in the air was palpable. Barbara had appeared there for a very specific reason, and everyone realized that this unexpected visit would bring consequences that none of them were prepared to face. Barbara Fuller slowly roamed the bakery with calculating eyes, examining every detail as if she were assessing enemy territory. Her high-heeled shoes clicked on the ceramic floor, creating a threatening rhythm that made Lily hide behind her mother's skirt. A very cozy bakery, she commented, lightly touching the glass counter where the sweets were displayed. Especially for those who need shelter. Susan felt her legs trembling, but forced herself to maintain her composure. Seeing Barbara there, in the only place where she had found safety in recent weeks, was like reliving a nightmare. If you came to buy something, you can choose, Jonathan said coldly. Otherwise, I don't think there's any reason to prolong your visit. Barbara laughed softly, a sound that chilled the blood of everyone present. How hostile, Mr. Harding. I'm just a local businesswoman paying a courtesy visit to a colleague. Colleague? Well, we're both employers in Harmony Creek. We both know our former employee here very well. She looked directly at Susan. By the way, I hope she's being more collaborative here than she was with me. Susan finally found her voice. I've always been collaborative, Barbara. The problem was that you didn't like collaboration when it included questions. Questions? Barbara feigned surprise. What kind of questions could a simple accounting employee ask that would bother someone? Questions about numbers that didn't add up, about payments to companies that no one could explain what services they provided. Barbara's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly regained her composure. Ah, yes, your famous investigations. I always thought you had a very fertile imagination, Susan. Jonathan moved closer. And what brought you here today exactly? Curiosity, Barbara replied, walking towards the door that led to the back. I heard you're having some problems with the city authorities. What a shame. Temporary problems, Jonathan said firmly. Temporary? Barbara laughed again. My dear, in a small town like Harmony Creek, some problems have the nasty habit of becoming permanent, especially when it involves people who, how can I put it, don't know when to stop asking inconvenient questions. Lily pulled at her mother's dress, whispering, Mommy, I don't like this lady. Barbara heard and crouched down to the girl's level, but Lily immediately hid completely behind Susan. What an adorable child, Barbara said with false sweetness. It must be very difficult for a single mother to raise a daughter alone, especially without financial stability. The implicit threat was clear to all the adults present. Jonathan took a step forward, placing himself between Barbara and Lily. I think it's best if you leave now. Of course, Barbara said, heading for the exit. I just came to take a look at your new venture and say hello to my former employee. At the door, she turned one last time. Oh, Susan, a word of advice. Some bridges, when burned, cannot be rebuilt. And some people, when they make the wrong enemies, find that Harmony Creek can be a very small town to hide in. After she left, the silence in the bakery was deafening. Susan collapsed into a chair, her legs finally giving way to the weight of the tension. She knows, she murmured. She knows I still have the documents. How can you be sure? The way she spoke, the questions she asked. Barbara never did anything without a reason. If she came all the way here, it's because she's worried about something. Lily approached her mother, holding her hand. Mommy, why are you sad? I'm not sad, sweetie. I'm just worried. Is the bad lady going to send us away from the little house? Lily's question echoed the fears that everyone was feeling. Jonathan knelt down beside the two. No one is going to send you away, Princess. This is our home now. That afternoon, Robert arrived with news that further complicated the situation. He had discovered additional information about the companies linked to the Miller family that shed new light on the whole situation. Jonathan, the situation is worse than we thought, he said, spreading documents on the table. Bennett Miller, father of the current mayor, wasn't just the owner of those companies. He had connections with at least 12 different businesses in the city over the past 20 years. What kind of businesses? Construction companies, consulting, firms, service providers. All of them received city contracts or did business with large local companies like the textile mill. Susan examined the documents. Robert, were you able to find out the total amount of payments these companies received? I was able to make an estimate based on available public records. We're talking about millions of dollars over the years. Millions? Jonathan whistled softly. This isn't just small-time corruption. It's a systemic scheme. And there's more, Robert continued. I discovered that 3 businessmen who tried to report irregularities involving city contracts in the last 5 years ended up having serious problems with inspections, licenses, and permits. 2 of them were forced to close their businesses. How did you find this out? I talked to Mary, the reporter from the local newspaper. She's been documenting these cases for years, but she's never been able to publish anything because she didn't have enough evidence to prove the connections. Dudu, Susan leaned over the table. And now we have it. Potentially, yes, but there's a problem. Mary told me that Barbara Fuller is on the editorial board of the newspaper. Any attempt to publish an article about the scheme would go through her first. So we're surrounded, Jonathan murmured. City Hall on one side, the mill on the other, and even the local press is compromised. It was at that moment that Lily, who was playing quietly in the corner, made an observation that completely changed everyone's perspective. Uncle Jonathan, why did the bad lady know our little house? What do you mean, Princess? She knew where our room was. She looked straight at the back door, as if she already knew we lived there. The three adults looked at each other, immediately realizing the implication of Lily's words. Barbara had demonstrated specific knowledge about the housing arrangements. At the bakery, she's being watched, Robert said in a low voice. All your activities, all your movements. For how long? Asked Susan, the fear evident in her voice. Probably since the day you were fired, Jonathan replied. They needed to make sure you weren't going to do anything with the information you had. And now that I'm working with you, who has resources and connections, now you've become a real danger to them. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Jonathan and Susan stayed awake, planning their next steps. The situation had become too dangerous to be ignored, but also too complex to be resolved easily. Susan, I need to ask you a difficult question, Jonathan said. Are you absolutely sure about the irregularities you discovered at the mill? I am. I have all the evidence saved, including copies of documents that prove the irregular payments. And would you be willing to testify officially about it, knowing that this would mean facing not only Barbara, but the entire power structure of the town? Susan was silent for a long moment, looking towards the room where Lily slept. If it's the only way to guarantee a safe future for my daughter, yes. Then we're going to need outside help, someone who isn't involved with local politics. Who? I have a cousin in Harrisburg, a public prosecutor. Maybe he can advise us on how to proceed without alerting the wrong people. It was then that they heard a strange noise coming from outside. Jonathan approached the window and saw a dark car parked across the street, with someone watching the bakery through binoculars. They're not even trying to hide anymore, he murmured. What does that mean? It means that we've reached the point where they don't care if we know we're being watched, and that, Susan, is much more dangerous than being watched secretly. The feeling that they were being cornered intensified when the phone rang. Jonathan answered, and an unknown voice said only, "You have 24 hours to send the woman and the child out of town. This is your last opportunity to resolve this the easy way." The call ended, leaving a tense silence that was broken only by the sound of the car driving away from the street. The following morning brought with it a heavy atmosphere of expectation. Jonathan had spent the night sleepless, alternating between watching the street and making calls to his cousin in Harrisburg. Dr. Michael Harding, a prosecutor for the district attorney's office, had agreed to meet with them that afternoon, but the distance to the capital and the 24-hour deadline given in the phone threat created an impossible dilemma. Susan woke Lily up earlier than normal, her hands trembling as she prepared breakfast. The girl immediately realized that something was wrong. "Mummy, why are your eyes red? I didn't sleep very well, sweetie, but don't worry. Is it because of the bad lady from yesterday?" Lily's perspicacity continued to surprise the adults. Even at 6 years old, she understood more about the situation than any child should. "In part, yes," admitted Susan, not wanting to lie to her daughter. "Are we going to have to leave the little house?" Before Susan could answer, Jonathan entered the kitchen with a determined expression on his face. "No one is leaving," he said firmly, "but we're going to have to be very brave today." "Brave how?" asked Lily, always curious. Brave like when you found that little box buried. Sometimes we need to look for answers in places we don't expect to find them. At 9 in the morning, the first unpleasant surprise of the day arrived. In the form of Paul Bennett, the city inspector, accompanied this time by 2 police officers. "Mr. Harding, we've come to fulfill the established deadline," announced Paul with ill-disguised satisfaction. "The irregularities have not been resolved. I'm here to shut down the establishment." "What irregularities?" protested Robert, who had arrived early, bringing all the necessary documents. "Last night we resolved all the issues pointed out in the inspection." Paul examined the papers with disdain. The regulations changed again during the early morning hours. City Ordinance 847/2023, published at 6 o'clock this morning. Robert quickly flipped through the printed ordinance that Paul handed him. "This is absurd. These requirements are impossible to meet. No commercial establishment in the city could meet these requirements." "Then they'll have to adapt or close," Paul replied, beginning to stick closure tape on the bakery door. Jonathan watched the scene with growing indignation, but knew that reacting impulsively would only worsen the situation. It was then that he noticed something he hadn't noticed before. One of the requirements of the new ordinance specified that establishments with housing irregularities should have their occupants removed immediately by the competent authorities. "You can't do that," he said, interposing himself between the police officers and the back door where Susan and Lily were. "We can and we will," Paul replied. "The ordinance is very clear about irregular housing in a commercial area." It was at that moment that Lily appeared, holding in her hand one of the old documents she had found buried. During the morning's confusion, no one had noticed that she had picked up some of the papers. "Uncle Jonathan," she said, showing the document, "this paper has the name of the man who came here yesterday." Jonathan took the paper, examining it quickly. It was a land sale contract, and one of the signatures was Paul Bennett, the same inspector who was now shutting down his bakery. "Interesting coincidence," Jonathan murmured, showing the document to Robert. Paul tried to disguise it, but his expression changed instantly when he saw the paper. "Where did you get this?" "It was buried in the backyard," Lily replied innocently, "along with other papers from people who were doing hidden things." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Paul reached out to take the document, but Jonathan pushed him away. "It seems we have much more to talk about than I imagined," Jonathan said calmly. "Return that document immediately. It's city property." "Actually," Robert intervened, examining the paper more closely, "this is a private contract, and by the date, it was signed when you were still an employee of a private company, not the city." Paul was visibly nervous now. The 2 police officers watched the situation with growing discomfort, realizing that there was more behind that shutdown than they had been informed. "Sergeant," said one of the officers to the other, "I think we better call the chief. This situation is getting out of our scope." "It's not necessary," Paul said quickly. "We're just going to postpone the shutdown for a few hours, so that all the documents can be reviewed properly." After Paul and the police officers left, Jonathan, Susan, and Robert gathered to examine all the documents that Lily had found. What they discovered was even more shocking than they expected. "Paul Bennett wasn't just a corrupt inspector," said Robert, organizing the papers chronologically. "He was an active part of the scheme from the beginning. Look here. He brokered the sale of at least 6 pieces of land in the city over the past 15 years, always involving the Miller family, companies, and always for below-market values," added Susan, applying her accounting knowledge to the documents. "Look at these sale values compared to the market appraisals of the time." "That means he knew exactly what he was looking for when he came to do the inspection," concluded Jonathan. "He wasn't just carrying out political orders. He was protecting his own interests." Lily, who was playing near the adults, looked up. "Uncle Jonathan, are there more things buried in the backyard?" More things. Yes, when I was digging yesterday, I saw other places where the dirt was different, as if someone had hidden more things. The three adults looked at each other. If Lily was right, there could be more evidence buried in the bakery's backyard. "Princess," said Jonathan, "can you show us where you saw those other places?" "I can, but are we going to look for it like a hidden treasure?" "Exactly like a treasure." In the backyard, Lily guided the adults to 3 different points where she had noticed that the earth seemed to have been moved. At each location, they found something: a can with more documents, a plastic envelope with photographs, and a small box with old cassette tapes. "Who the hell buried all this here?" asked Robert, examining the photographs that showed meetings between several well-known people in the city. "Someone who wanted to preserve evidence but was afraid to keep it at home," Susan replied. "Someone who knew they were in danger, or someone who was planning to use this information in the future," added Jonathan. One of the photographs caught special attention. It showed Barbara Fuller, Paul Bennett, and 2 men they didn't recognize in what appeared to be a business meeting at a local restaurant. "This photo must be about 2 years old," Robert estimated. "Look at the date on the back." Susan picked up one of the cassette tapes. "We need to listen to this. It may contain recorded conversations." "I have an old tape recorder in the office," Jonathan said. When they finally managed to play one of the tapes, they heard a conversation that confirmed their worst suspicions. It was a discussion between Barbara and a male voice they recognized as being Paul Bennett, planning how to resolve the problem of the overly curious employee. "She has access to information that could harm us," said Barbara's voice on the recording. "She needs to be removed from the company before she discovers more than she already has." "What if she's already copied the documents?" asked Paul. "Then we'll have to make sure she has nowhere to use them. An unemployed woman without resources, with a young daughter to raise. Who's going to believe her against us?" The recording continued with specific details about how to make Susan's life difficult after the dismissal, including instructions for no other employer in the city to hire her. Susan was pale, listening to her own life being planned and destroyed by people she considered only co-workers. "This is criminal," she murmured. "They systematically planned to destroy me." "And now we have the evidence," Jonathan said, "but we need to decide what to do with it before they discover we found it." It was at that moment that they heard cars stopping in front of the bakery. Through the window, they saw Paul Bennett, returning, this time accompanied by more people, including a woman they recognized as being an employee of Child Protective Services. "They came to get Lily," said Susan, the panic evident in her voice. "Over my dead body," Jonathan replied. But he knew that confronting the authorities directly would only result in more problems. "Uncle Jonathan," said Lily, pulling his shirt, "can we take the treasure to another place?" The girl's innocent suggestion gave Jonathan an idea. "Robert, can you go out the back with all these documents? Take them straight to your cousin in Harrisburg." "I can, but what about you?" "We'll buy time, make them believe we're still looking for evidence." The knock on the door echoed through the bakery, followed by Paul Bennett's authoritative voice. "Open up immediately. We have a search warrant." The game had changed completely, and now they were racing against time to preserve the evidence that could reveal the truth about the entire conspiracy. Robert managed to leave through the back of the bakery, carrying a backpack with the most important documents, but not before Paul Bennett and his team forced their way in through the front door. The employee from Child Protective Services, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Eleanor Davies, entered with a professional expression that barely disguised her discomfort with the situation. "Where's the child?" Paul asked immediately, completely ignoring normal protocols. "Lily is with me," Jonathan replied, positioning himself protectively in front of Susan and the girl. "And I would like to know by what authority you invaded my property." "We have a warrant," Paul said, waving a paper. "Suspicion of child abuse and illegal housing." Dr. Davies approached, her professional gaze quickly examining Lily. The girl was clearly well cared for, clean, well-fed, and wearing appropriate clothing. There were no visible signs of neglect or abuse. "May I speak to the child?" she asked Susan. "Of course," Susan replied, kneeling down to Lily's height. "Sweetie, this lady is going to ask you some questions, okay?" Lily nodded, but stayed close. To her mother, Dr. Davies conducted a quick but efficient interview, asking about Lily's routine, if she felt safe, if she had food to eat and a place to sleep. "I really like living here," Lily said honestly. "Uncle Jonathan is very good to me and Mommy, and I have a backyard to play in." "Has anyone ever hurt you here?" "No. Only bad people who came from outside tried to hurt me. But Uncle Jonathan protected me." Lily's answer clearly wasn't what Paul was expecting to hear. He intervened abruptly in the conversation. "The child is being manipulated. It's obvious she was instructed on what to say." "Mr. Bennett," Dr. Davies said firmly, "please let me conduct the assessment. It's my area of expertise." During the interview, Jonathan observed that Paul was more interested in rummaging through the bakery than in checking on Lily's well-being. He rummaged through drawers, opened cabinets, and was clearly looking for something specific. "What exactly are you looking for?" Jonathan asked. "Evidence of illegal housing," Paul replied evasively, but his eyes betrayed growing anxiety for not finding what he was looking for. It was at that moment that Lily made an observation that completely changed the dynamics of the situation. "Why are you looking for the papers we found buried?" she asked Paul innocently. The silence that followed was deafening. Paul stopped rummaging through the drawers and turned slowly to the girl. "What papers?" "The papers that were buried in the backyard, with your name and other people doing hidden things." Dr. Davies frowned. "What's this story about buried papers?" Paul tried to regain control of the situation. "The child is fantasizing. Children at this age mix reality with imagination." "I'm not fantasizing," Lily protested, hurt. "Mommy and Uncle Jonathan saw the papers too. There were even pictures of you with the bad lady who came here yesterday." The mention of the photographs made Paul pale visibly. Dr. Davies immediately realized that there was something more complex happening there. "Mr. Harding," she said formally, "could you explain to me about these documents that the child mentioned?" Jonathan made a risky decision. He decided to trust the professional from Child Protective Services and tell part of the truth. "Doctor, we found some old documents buried in the backyard, documents that suggest irregularities involving public officials and local businessmen, including Mr. Bennett here." "That's a serious accusation," said Dr. Davies. "It's a lie." Paul exploded. "They're trying to frame me to escape the charges of child abuse." "What charges of child abuse?" asked Dr. Davies, her voice becoming firmer. "In my preliminary report, I see no evidence of neglect or abuse. The child is visibly well cared for and healthy." Paul realized he had revealed too much. We received an anonymous tip." "From whom? And why are you, a building inspector, conducting a child protection investigation instead of leaving it to the competent professionals?" Dr. Davies's question exposed the fundamental irregularity of the entire operation. Paul had no legal authority to lead an investigation on child welfare. At that moment, an unexpected reinforcement arrived. Mrs. Davis, the bakery employee, entered accompanied by 3 neighbors who had become worried about the movement of official cars. "Mr. Harding, is everything okay?" asked Mrs. Davis. "We saw all this commotion and got worried." "Mrs. Davis, I'm glad you arrived," said Jonathan. "Can you tell the doctor here how Lily and Susan have been treated?" Mrs. Davis didn't hesitate. "Doctor, this girl is a sweetheart, well-behaved, well-cared for, always happily playing in the backyard. And the mother is a hard-working and honest woman. I've never seen signs of any problem." The neighbors corroborated. Mrs. Davis's testimony. Mrs. Henderson, who lived next door, added, "Doctor, the ones causing problems for this family are other people. Powerful people in the city who don't like it when someone asks inconvenient questions." "What kind of questions?" asked Dr. Davies, her professional curiosity piqued. "Questions about public money that disappears, about contracts that don't." "Makes sense, about people who get rich without explanation," replied Mrs. Henderson. "This town has secrets, Doctor, and whoever tries to discover those secrets ends up having problems." Paul was visibly nervous about the direction of the conversation. "These people don't know what they're talking about. It's just small-town gossip." "It's gossip that can be proven," Jonathan said calmly, "especially with the documents we found." "Where are these documents?" asked Dr. Davies. "In a safe place," Jonathan replied, "being analyzed by competent authorities." The expression of panic on Paul's face confirmed to everyone present that the documents contained truly compromising information. Dr. Davies made a decision that surprised everyone. "Mr. Bennett, I need you to leave this establishment immediately." "What do you mean?" "You have no legal authority to conduct this investigation. Your presence here is compromising the impartiality of the process. Furthermore, if there are documents that implicate you in irregularities, you have a conflict of interest in this case. You can't kick me out. I represent the City Hall." "And I represent the State Child Protective Services," she replied firmly. "My authority in this specific matter surpasses yours." After Paul left, clearly furious, Dr. Davies sat down with Jonathan and Susan for a longer conversation. "I need to understand completely what's happening here," she said. "Obviously there's more to this story than a simple child welfare check." Susan told her story from the beginning: the unfair dismissal, the irregularities she discovered at the mill, the difficulties in getting a job, and finally, the meeting with Jonathan that changed their lives. "And these buried documents?" asked Dr. Davies. "They reveal a corruption scheme that involves several local authorities," explained Jonathan, "including manipulation of public contracts, transfers of properties for below-market values, and systematic persecution of whoever tries to report irregularities." "That's why you're being persecuted." "Exactly, and now they're using Lily as a pretext to intimidate us." Dr. Davies observed Lily, who was playing quietly in the corner, completely oblivious to the complexity of the situation that surrounded her. "This child is clearly in a safe and loving environment," she said finally. "There is no justification to remove her from this home. In fact, considering the circumstances, separating mother and daughter would be detrimental to the emotional development of the minor." The relief on Susan's face was immediate and profound. "But," continued Dr. Davies, "you need to know that this decision will generate even more political pressure. The people behind this persecution won't give up easily." "We're prepared for that," said Jonathan. "I hope you are, because from what I've observed today, you're facing adversaries much more powerful and determined than you imagine." That afternoon, after everyone had left, Lily asked a question that deeply touched the hearts of Jonathan and Susan. "Uncle Jonathan, why do the bad people want to separate me from Mommy?" "Because sometimes, when people do wrong things, they try to hurt innocent people to protect their secrets," he explained, choosing words that a child could understand. "But you're not going to let them take me, right?" "Never," promised Jonathan, hugging the girl. "We're a family now, and families protect each other." But even as he made that promise, Jonathan knew that the battle was just beginning, and that the next moves of their adversaries could be even more dangerous than everything they had faced so far. 3 days had passed since the visit from Child Protective Services, and a tense calm had settled over the bakery. Robert hadn't returned from Harrisburg yet, but had sent a message saying that the documents were being analyzed by the competent authorities. Jonathan tried to maintain the normal routine, but knew it was just the calm before the storm. Susan had fully taken over the administration of the bakery, and her competence with numbers was impressing even Mrs. Davis. She reorganized the entire inventory control system and discovered several ways to optimize operating costs. "I've never seen anyone work with spreadsheets like that," commented Mrs. Davis, watching Susan reorganize the financial data. "You have a gift for numbers." "I spent years doing it at the mill," Susan replied. "The difference is that here I can work honestly, without pressure to hide irregularities." Lily had completely adapted to life at the bakery. Every morning after breakfast, she helped Mrs. Davis arrange the sweets in the window, always humming softly as she worked. Her presence brought a different energy to the establishment, and regular customers had become fond of the smiling girl who greeted them at the entrance. It was on one of those quiet mornings that everything changed again. A luxurious car stopped in front of the bakery, and a tall, well-dressed man, whom Jonathan didn't immediately recognize, stepped out of it. He was about 50 years old, with well-groomed grey hair and a posture that exuded authority. He entered the bakery with confident steps, looking around as if he were evaluating an investment. "Jonathan Harding?" he asked, extending his hand. "My name is Dr. Henry Moore. I'm a lawyer. How can I help you?" "Actually, I came here at the request of some of my clients. They would like to make a proposal to amicably resolve this uncomfortable situation that has arisen in the city." Susan interrupted her work, paying attention to the conversation. Lily, playing near the counter, also looked up, her childlike instinct capturing the tension in the air. "What kind of proposal?" Jonathan asked cautiously. "Well, my clients understand that there have been misunderstandings on both sides. They are willing to resolve all outstanding issues with the City Hall, allow you to reopen your bakeries normally, and even offer financial compensation for the inconvenience." "In exchange for?" Dr. Moore smiled, but there was coldness in his eyes. "In exchange for a little discretion. Some information that may have come into your hands would be better kept secret. And perhaps it would be better if Ms. Parker found job opportunities in another city, where she can restart her life without interference." The proposal was presented politely, but the implicit threat was clear to everyone present. "And if I don't accept?" Jonathan asked. "It would be a shame," replied Dr. Moore, still smiling, "because sometimes when people insist on making private information public, they end up discovering that other people can also make information about them public. Information about tax irregularities, for example, or about the suitability of certain people to care for children." Susan approached, her voice firm despite the evident fear. "Are you threatening us?" "Not at all, my dear lady. I am offering a civilized solution to a problem that can become much more complicated for everyone involved." Lily left her toys and approached Susan, holding her hand. Even without fully understanding the conversation, she perceived that this man represented danger. "Mommy," she whispered, "I don't like this man." Dr. Moore observed the girl with a look that made Jonathan position himself protectively between them. "An adorable child," commented the lawyer. "It would be terrible if something were to harm her family's stability again." "I think it's best if you leave," Jonathan said, his voice loaded with contained threat. Of course, but think about my proposal. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, my clients may find themselves forced to use less cordial methods to resolve the situation." After Dr. Moore left, a heavy silence dominated the bakery. Mrs. Davis, who had witnessed the entire conversation, was the first to speak. "Mr. Harding, that man isn't from Harmony Creek. He's from out of town, one of those expensive lawyers that powerful people hire when they want to solve problems without getting their own hands dirty." "How do you know that?" "My brother-in-law worked for a law firm in Harrisburg. I know this type. They show up when the situation is getting too serious for the local politicians to handle directly." Susan sat down, her legs trembling with tension. They're escalating the situation. That means the documents that Robert took really scared them. Or that they've discovered something even worse than we imagined, added Jonathan. That afternoon, while Lily played in the backyard under Mrs. Davis's watchful eye, Jonathan and Susan discussed their options. All of them seemed bad. We can accept the proposal, Susan said hesitantly. Take the money, start over somewhere else, and let them continue doing this to other people. How many other employees like you have been fired for discovering irregularities? How many other families have been destroyed to protect their secrets? But what if we can't prove anything? What if in the end we lose everything and on top of that Lily gets hurt? Susan, look at your daughter. She's happy, safe, has a home. 3 weeks ago, you were sleeping on the street. We've come this far fighting. We're not going to give up now. What if they carry out the threats? What if they invent something to incriminate me? Before Jonathan could answer, they heard Lily's animated voice coming from the backyard. Mrs. Davis, I found more things buried. Everyone ran outside, where they found Lily holding a small leather notebook, clearly old and stained by moisture. Where did you find this, sweetie? Asked Susan. It was under the big tree, in the place where the dirt was darker, as if someone had planted a secret. Jonathan took the notebook carefully. The pages were yellowed, and some stuck together by moisture, but it was still possible to read the contents. It was a diary of handwritten notes, with dates that went back more than 10 years. It's an accounting record, said Susan, examining the pages. Someone was documenting payments, transfers. Look here. There are names and amounts. As they flipped through the notebook, they discovered that it was a detailed record of all the irregular transactions involving the Miller family companies. Each page contained evidence of corruption, bribes, manipulation of public contracts. Whoever wrote this knew they were in danger, observed Jonathan, noting that the notes became more hurried and less organized in the final pages. And look at the last entry, said Susan, pointing to a note on the last page with text. If something happens to me, these records must reach the authorities. They cannot continue destroying lives to protect their crimes. My God, murmured Mrs. Davis. Someone died because of this information. The question hung in the air, creating an even gloomier atmosphere. If they were right, they weren't the only ones to discover the corruption in the city. Other people had tried to expose it before them, and the consequences had been tragic. Uncle Jonathan, said Lily, noticing the adult's worried expression, are the secrets I find dangerous. The girl's innocent question deeply touched everyone present. She had become, unknowingly, the key to unraveling a conspiracy that could have cost lives. Some secrets are dangerous when they're hidden, Jonathan explained carefully, but when they're revealed to the right people, they can help protect a lot of people. So we're going to tell the secrets to the right people? We are, Princess. We're going to tell the right people. That night, Jonathan made a decision that would change everything. He called a contact he hadn't used in years, an investigative journalist from a major newspaper in Harrisburg, someone with enough credibility to make the whole story public without being intimidated by local pressures. Mark, it's Jonathan Harding. I need to talk to you about a story that might interest the paper, a story about corruption, conspiracy, and possibly something much worse. While talking on the phone, Jonathan watched Susan and Lily playing in the backyard through the window, oblivious to the danger that surrounded them. He had made his decision. He would not accept Dr. Moore's proposal. He would go all the way, no matter the cost. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, in a private room of an expensive restaurant in Harmony Creek, Dr. Moore was reporting to his clients that the amicable solution had been rejected, and that it was time to move on to more drastic measures. They don't want to do this the easy way, he said to a group of men whose faces remained in the shadows. They're going to force our hand. Then let's show them the consequences of their choices, replied a voice that Jonathan would immediately recognize if he heard it. It's time to end this situation once and for all. Friday morning brought with it the first sign that the situation had escalated dangerously. Jonathan woke up to the smell of smoke and the sound of distant sirens. Through the window, he saw orange flames on the horizon in the direction where one of his other bakeries was located. He dressed quickly and woke Susan. "Something's happening. I think they set the Main Street bakery on fire." "My God," she murmured, still sleepy. "What now?" "Stay here with Lily. I'll go see what happened." When Jonathan arrived at the scene, he found the firefighters still fighting the flames that consumed what remained of his second bakery. Captain Davis, commander of the local fire department, approached him with a grave expression. "Jonathan, I'm sorry. The fire started around 3 in the morning. When we arrived, it was impossible to save the building." "Was it an accident?" The captain hesitated before answering. "We're going to investigate, but there are signs that it may have been arson. We found traces of accelerant in several parts of the establishment." "Accelerant?" "Gasoline, probably. Someone wanted to make sure the fire would spread quickly." Jonathan observed the smouldering wreckage of what had been his livelihood for more than 10 years, all destroyed in a matter of hours, clearly as a message about the consequences of not accepting Dr. Moore's amicable proposal. "Captain, can I trust that the investigation will be impartial?" Captain Davis looked around, making sure no one else was listening. "Jonathan, I've known you for years. I know you're an honest man, but I also know that there are pressures in the city, pressures that can influence investigations." "What are you trying to tell me?" "I'm saying that maybe it's better for you to have your own evidence about what happened here." Jonathan understood the message. Even the firefighters were being pressured not to investigate the fire properly. When he returned to the bakery, where Susan and Lily were waiting for him, he found them both hugging on the couch, clearly frightened. Lily ran to him as soon as she saw him enter. "Uncle Jonathan, Mummy said bad people burned your bakery." "It was an accident, Princess," he lied, not wanting to scare her more than she already was. "It wasn't an accident," said Susan, her gaze directly in his eyes. "It was a warning. Susan, you don't need to protect me from the truth, Jonathan. I know exactly what this means. They burned the bakery to show that they can destroy everything if we don't do what they want." Lily looked from one adult to the other, trying to understand the conversation. "Are the bad people going to burn our little house too?" The girl's question cut both their hearts. Jonathan knelt down to her level, holding her small hands. "No one is going to burn our house, Lily. I promise." "But how can you promise that?" "If you couldn't protect the other bakery?" she asked with the implacable logic of children. The question hung in the air because Jonathan didn't have a convincing answer. That morning, the news spread quickly throughout the city. The fire at Jonathan's bakery was the topic in every conversation, but there were 2 versions circulating. One that spoke of an accident caused by electrical problems, and another that whispered about possible criminal causes. Mrs. Davis arrived earlier than normal, clearly shaken. "Mr. Harding, the whole town is talking. They say it was on purpose." "And what else are they saying?" "That you should have accepted some proposal you received, that there are powerful people in the city who don't like to be contradicted." "Who is spreading this information?" "No one knows for sure, but the conversations started very early, as if someone had instructed people to spread these versions." It was at that moment that Robert finally returned from Harrisburg, bringing news that completely changed the scenario of the situation. "Jonathan, you're not going to believe what we discovered," he said, entering the bakery with a folder full of documents. "The papers we found are just the tip of the iceberg." "What did you discover?" "The district attorney's office is investigating a corruption scheme that extends far beyond Harmony Creek. It involves at least 6 cities in the region, million-dollar contracts, and a network of shell companies. And our documents. They are fundamental to prove how the scheme works, especially the diary that Lily found yesterday. The handwritten notes coincide perfectly with bank transactions that the investigators had already identified as suspicious. Susan approached, interested. "Robert, is there any specific mention of the textile mill?" "There are several. Barbara. Fuller isn't just an accomplice to the scheme, she's one of the coordinators. Her factory serves as a money laundering center for several other operations. That explains why she got so nervous when I discovered the irregularities in the accounting," said Susan. "It explains much more than that," continued Robert. "It explains why you were fired, why no other employer in the city wanted to hire you, and why they are trying to intimidate you now." Lily, who was playing near the adults, looked up. "Robert, are the bad people going to be arrested?" "Yes, little one, thanks to the treasures you found buried." "And are we going to be able to stay in the little house forever?" Lily's question touched on something that everyone was thinking but no one had verbalized. What would happen to them after this whole situation was resolved? "Lily," said Jonathan, sitting down next to her, "what would you like to happen to us?" "I wanted us to continue being a family. You, me, and Mommy, and for no one else to try to separate us." The girl's simple and direct answer echoed the feelings of all those present. In the midst of chaos and threats, a non-conventional but deeply united family had formed. "And if that happened, would you be happy?" asked Susan. "Very happy. Happier than when I find buried treasures." It was at that moment that they received a visit that no one expected. Dr. Davies, from Child Protective Services, arrived accompanied by a man in a suit who introduced himself as Dr. Matthews, a public prosecutor from Harrisburg. "Mr. Harding, Miss Parker," said Dr. Matthews formally, "I came personally to thank you for your collaboration with our investigation. The evidence you provided is crucial to dismantling a corruption scheme that has been operating for more than 15 years. "What about our safety?" asked Jonathan. "They burned one of my bakeries last night." "We know, and that's why we're here. You are in real danger, and we need to take measures to protect you." Dr. Davies spoke up. "From the point of view of the child's well-being, I recommend that you accept official protection until those responsible are arrested." "What kind of protection?" asked Susan. "Temporary relocation to a safe place, police escort when necessary, and above all, absolute secrecy about where you are." Lily listened to everything attentively. "Are we going to have to leave the little house?" "For a little while, my dear," explained Dr. Davies, "until there is no more danger." "And then we come back?" "Then you can choose where you want to live," replied Dr. Matthews. "But I can tell you in advance that, considering your collaboration with justice, there will be significant financial compensation. You won't have to worry about money for a long time." Jonathan, Susan, and Lily looked at each other. It was what they had dreamed of: safety, financial stability, and the chance to remain together as a family. But it also meant temporarily leaving the place that had become their home. "When do we need to decide?" asked Jonathan. "Today," replied Dr. Matthews. "The arrests will begin tomorrow morning. If you're here when that happens, you could become targets of retaliation." That afternoon, while packing the essentials, Lily made a last visit to the backyard where she had discovered all the treasures that had changed their lives. "Uncle Jonathan," she said, "can I take some dirt from our little house to plant in the new house and remember here?" The idea deeply touched Jonathan. "Of course, Princess, let's take a little piece of our home with us." As Lily filled a small vase with dirt from the backyard, Jonathan and Susan knew they were closing a chapter of their lives. But for the first time in months, they had real hope that the next chapter would be written by themselves, free from the threats and corruption that had dominated their lives. What none of them knew was that on that same afternoon, in a private room, The final details of the police operation that would forever change the political face of Harmony Creek were being finalized, and that their lives were about to take a turn that none of them could have imagined. The safe house was located on the outskirts of Gettysburg, a discreet property surrounded by trees that offered total privacy. Lily explored the new environment with the natural curiosity of children, but Jonathan and Susan realized that she missed her little house at the bakery. During the first night, she woke up 3 times looking for the backyard where she used to play. "Mommy, when are we going back home?" she asked the next morning, hugging the teddy bear that Jonathan had bought to comfort her. "Soon, sweetie, when the bad people are gone from our town. Are they really going to go away?" "They are," replied Jonathan, joining the conversation. "Remember the treasures you found? They helped the good people discover all the wrong things the bad people were doing." That morning, Dr. Matthews called with the first news about the operation that had begun at dawn. "Jonathan, I need to inform you about the developments," he said. "We've arrested 16 people so far, including Paul Bennett and 3 city council members from Harmony Creek. And Barbara Fuller?" "Not yet. She disappeared during the night. But we have an arrest warrant against her, and all the mill's bank accounts have been blocked." Susan approached the phone. "Dr. Matthews, Barbara had connections outside the city. It's possible she fled far away." "That's what we suspect, but we have cooperation with the FBI now. She won't be able to hide for long." During the following days, news about the operation dominated the regional press. The newspaper from Harrisburg, through Jonathan's journalist friend, published a series of detailed reports on the corruption scheme, using the evidence found by Lily as a basis to explain how the criminal network worked. "Look, Uncle Jonathan," said Lily, seeing her picture in the newspaper next to an article titled, "The Girl Who Discovered the Treasure of Truth." "I'm in the newspaper like a real detective." "You're our most important detective," replied Jonathan, hugging her. "Without you, the bad people would never have been discovered." But not all the news was positive. Robert visited them at the safe house, bringing worrying information. "The situation is more complicated than we expected," he said. "Barbara didn't act alone when she disappeared. She took with her important files from the mill, including records that could incriminate other people." "What kind of records?" asked Susan. "According to investigators, documents that prove the involvement of businessmen from other cities and possibly state politicians." Jonathan frowned. "That means she can try to negotiate these documents in exchange for immunity." "That's exactly what we fear, and if she succeeds, it could reverse much of the operation." "But what about the evidence we found here? The recordings, the buried documents? They're important, but they don't cover the entire extent of the scheme. Barbara has information that can send many important people to prison. That makes her a very valuable fugitive." That night, Susan and Jonathan talked at length about what this meant for their future. "What if she manages to reverse everything?" asked Susan. "What if in the end all the corrupt people go free and we remain as the only culprits for this whole mess?" "It's not going to happen," said Jonathan, although his voice didn't demonstrate total conviction. "We have too much solid evidence." "Jonathan, I need to tell you something I've never told you before." He turned to her, noticing the seriousness in her tone. "When I worked at the mill, I discovered that Barbara wasn't just embezzling money. She was falsifying export documents, selling products as if they were manufactured in the United States, when in reality they were illegally imported." "Why, Uncle Jonathan," said Lily, noticing the adult's worried expression, "are the secrets that I find dangerous?" The girl's innocent question deeply touched everyone present. She had become unknowingly the key to unraveling a conspiracy that could have cost lives. "Some secrets are dangerous when they're hidden," Jonathan explained carefully, "but when they're revealed to the right people, they can help protect a lot of people." "So, we're going to tell the secrets to the right people?" "We are, Princess. We're going to tell the right people." That night, Jonathan made a decision that would change everything. He called a contact he hadn't used in years, an investigative journalist from a major newspaper in Harrisburg, someone with enough credibility to make the whole story public without being intimidated by local pressures. "Mark, it's Jonathan Harding. I need to talk to you about a story that might interest the paper, a story about corruption, conspiracy, and possibly something much worse." While talking on the phone, Jonathan watched Susan and Lily playing in the backyard through the window, oblivious to the danger that surrounded them. He had made his decision. He would not accept Dr. Moore's proposal. He would go all the way, no matter the cost. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, in a private room of an expensive restaurant in Harmony Creek, Dr. Moore was reporting to his clients that the amicable solution had been rejected, and that it was time to move on to more drastic measures. "They don't want to do this the easy way," he said to a group of men whose faces remained in the shadows. "They're going to force our hand. Then let's show them the consequences of their choices," replied a voice that Jonathan would immediately recognize if he heard it. "It's time to end this situation once and for all." Friday morning brought with it the first sign that the situation had escalated dangerously. Jonathan woke up to the smell of smoke and the sound of distant sirens. Through the window, he saw orange flames on the horizon in the direction where one of his other bakeries was located. He dressed quickly and woke Susan. "Something's happening. I think they set the Main Street bakery on fire." "My God," she murmured, still sleepy. "What now?" "Stay here with Lily. I'll go see what happened." When Jonathan arrived at the scene, he found the firefighters still fighting the flames that consumed what remained of his second bakery. Captain Davis, commander of the local fire department, approached him with a grave expression. "Jonathan, I'm sorry. The fire started around 3 in the morning. When we arrived, it was impossible to save the building." "Was it an accident?" The captain hesitated before answering. "We're going to investigate, but there are signs that it may have been arson. We found traces of accelerant in several parts of the establishment." "Accelerant?" "Gasoline, probably. Someone wanted to make sure the fire would spread quickly." Jonathan observed the smoldering wreckage of what had been his livelihood for more than 10 years, all destroyed in a matter of hours, clearly as a message about the consequences of not accepting Dr. Moore's amicable proposal. "Captain, can I trust that the investigation will be impartial?" Captain Davis looked around, making sure no one else was listening. "Jonathan, I've known you for years. I know you're an honest man, but I also know that there are pressures in the city, pressures that can influence investigations. What are you trying to tell me?" "I'm saying that maybe it's better for you to have your own evidence about what happened here." Jonathan understood the message. Even the firefighters were being pressured not to investigate the fire properly. When he returned to the bakery, where Susan and Lily were waiting for him, he found them both hugging on the couch, clearly frightened. Lily ran to him as soon as she saw him enter. "Uncle Jonathan, Mummy said bad people burned your bakery." "It was an accident, Princess," he lied, not wanting to scare her more than she already was. "It wasn't an accident," said Susan, her gaze directly in his eyes. "It was a warning." "Susan." "You don't need to protect me from the truth, Jonathan. I know exactly what this means. They burned the bakery to show that they can destroy everything if we don't do what they want." Lily looked from one adult to the other, trying to understand the conversation. "Are the bad people going to burn our little house too?" The girl's question cut both their hearts. Jonathan knelt down to her level, holding her small hands. "No one is going to burn our house, Lily. I promise." "But how can you promise that? If you couldn't protect the other bakery?" she asked with the implacable logic of children. The question hung in the air, because Jonathan didn't have a convincing answer. That morning, the news spread quickly throughout the city. The fire at Jonathan's bakery was the topic in every conversation, but there were two versions circulating. one that spoke of an accident caused by electrical problems, and another that whispered about possible criminal causes. Mrs. Davis arrived earlier than normal, clearly shaken. "Mr. Harding, the whole town is talking. They say it was on purpose. And what else are they saying? That you should have accepted some proposal you received, that there are powerful people in the city who don't like to be contradicted." "Eh? Who is spreading this information?" "No one knows for sure, but the conversation started very early, as if someone had instructed people to spread these versions." It was at that moment that Robert finally returned from Harrisburg, bringing news that completely changed the scenario of the situation. "Jonathan, you're not going to believe what we discovered," he said, entering the bakery with a folder full of documents. "The papers we found are just the tip of the iceberg." "What did you discover?" "The district attorney's office is investigating a corruption scheme that extends far beyond Harmony Creek. It involves at least 6 cities in the region, million-dollar contracts, and a network of shell companies." "And our documents?" "They are fundamental to prove how the scheme works, especially the diary that Lily found yesterday. The handwritten notes coincide perfectly with bank transactions that the investigators had already identified as suspicious." Susan approached, interested. "Robert, is there any specific mention of the textile mill?" "There are several. Barbara Fuller isn't just an accomplice to the scheme. She's one of the coordinators. Her factory serves as a money laundering center for several other operations." "That explains why she got so nervous when I discovered the irregularities in the accounting," said Susan. "It explains much more than that," continued Robert. "It explains why you were fired, why no other employer in the city wanted to hire you, and why they are trying to intimidate you now." Lily, who was playing near, the adults, looked up. "Robert, are the bad people going to be arrested?" "Yes, little one, thanks to the treasures you found buried." "And are we going to be able to stay in the little house forever?" Lily's question touched on something that everyone was thinking, but no one had verbalized. What would happen to them after this whole situation was resolved? "Lily," said Jonathan, sitting down next to her, "what would you like to happen to us?" "I wanted us to continue being a family, you, me, and Mommy, and for no one else to try to separate us." The girl's simple and direct answer echoed the feelings of all those present. In the midst of chaos and threats, a non-conventional but deeply united family had formed. "And if that happened, would you be happy?" asked Susan. "Very happy. Happier than when I find buried treasures." It was at that moment that they received a visit that no one expected. Dr. Davies, from Child Protective Services, arrived accompanied by a man in a suit who introduced himself as Dr. Matthews, a public prosecutor from Harrisburg. "Mr. Harding." "Miss Parker," said Dr. Matthews formally, "I came personally to thank you for your collaboration with our investigation. The evidence you provided is crucial to dismantling a corruption scheme that has been operating for more than 15 years. What about our safety?" asked Jonathan. "They burned one of my bakeries last night." "We know, and that's why we're here. You are in real danger, and we need to take measures to protect you." Dr. Davies spoke up. "From the point of view of the child's well-being, I recommend that you accept official protection until those responsible are arrested." "What kind of protection?" asked Susan. "Temporary relocation to a safe place, police escort when necessary, and above all, absolute secrecy about where you are." Lily listened to everything attentively. "Are we going to have to leave the little house?" "For a little while, my dear," explained Dr. Davies, "until there is no more danger." "And then we come back?" "Then you can choose where you want to live," replied Dr. Matthews. "But I can tell you in advance that considering your collaboration with justice, there will be significant financial compensation." You won't have to worry about money for a long time. Jonathan, Susan, and Lily looked at each other. It was what they had dreamed of: safety, financial stability, and the chance to remain together as a family. But it also meant temporarily leaving the place that had become their home. "When do we need to decide?" asked Jonathan. "Today," replied Dr. Matthews. "The arrests will begin tomorrow morning. If you're here when that happens, you could become targets of retaliation." That afternoon, while packing the essentials, Lily made a last visit to the backyard where she had discovered all the treasures that had changed their lives. "Uncle Jonathan," she said, "can I take some dirt from our little house to plant in the new house and remember here?" The idea deeply touched Jonathan. "Of course, Princess. Let's take a little piece of our home with us." As Lily filled a small vase with dirt from the backyard, Jonathan and Susan knew they were closing a chapter of their lives. But for the first time in months, they had real hope that the next chapter would be written by themselves, free from the threats and corruption that had dominated their lives. What none of them knew was that, on that same afternoon, in a private room, the final details of the police operation that would forever change the political face of Harmony Creek were being finalized, and that their lives were about to take a turn that none of them could have imagined. The safe house was located on the outskirts of Gettysburg, a discreet property surrounded by trees that offered total privacy. Lily explored the new environment with the natural curiosity of children. But Jonathan and Susan realized that she missed her little house at the bakery. During the first night, she woke up 3 times, looking for the backyard where she used to play. "Mommy, when are we going back home?" she asked the next morning, hugging the teddy bear that Jonathan had bought to comfort her. "Soon, sweetie, when the bad people are gone from our town." "Are they really going to go away?" "They are," replied Jonathan, joining the conversation. "Remember the treasures you found? They helped the good people discover all the wrong things the bad people were doing." That morning, Dr. Matthews called with the first news about the operation that had begun at dawn. "Jonathan, I need to inform you about the developments," he said. "We've arrested 16 people so far, including Paul Bennett and 3 city council members from Harmony Creek." "And Barbara Fuller?" "Not yet. She disappeared during the night, but we have an arrest warrant against her, and all the mill's bank accounts have been blocked." Susan approached the phone. "Dr. Matthews, Barbara had connections outside the city. It's possible she fled far away. That's what we suspect. But we have cooperation with the FBI now. She won't be able to hide for long." During the following days, news about the operation dominated the regional press. The newspaper from Harrisburg, through Jonathan's journalist friend, published a series of detailed reports on the corruption scheme, using the evidence found by Lily as a basis to explain how the criminal network worked. "Look, Uncle Jonathan," said Lily, seeing her picture in the newspaper next to an article titled, "The Girl Who Discovered the Treasure of Truth." "I'm in the newspaper like a real detective." "You're our most important detective," replied Jonathan, hugging her. "Without you, the bad people would never have been discovered." But not all the news was positive. Robert visited them at the safe house, bringing worrying information. "The situation is more complicated than we expected," he said. "Barbara didn't act alone when she disappeared. She took with her important files from the mill, including records that could incriminate other people." "What kind of records?" asked Susan. "According to investigators, documents that prove the involvement of businessmen from other cities and possibly state politicians." Jonathan frowned. "That means she can try to negotiate these documents in exchange for immunity." "That's exactly what we fear, and if she succeeds, it could reverse much of the operation." "But what about the evidence we found here? The recordings, the buried documents?" "They're important, but they don't cover the entire extent of the scheme. Barbara has information that can send many important people to prison. That makes her a very valuable fugitive. That night, Susan and Jonathan talked at length about what this meant for their future. "What if she manages to reverse everything?" asked Susan. "What if, in the end, all the corrupt people go free and we remain as the only culprits for this whole mess?" "It's not going to happen," said Jonathan, although his voice didn't demonstrate total conviction. "We have too much solid evidence." "Jonathan, I need to tell you something I've never told you before." He turned to her, noticing the seriousness in her tone. "When I worked at the mill, I discovered that Barbara wasn't just embezzling money. She was falsifying export documents, selling products as if they were manufactured in the United States, when in reality they were illegally imported." "Why did you never mention this before?" "Because I had no proof. And because one of the companies involved in the illegal imports had a connection to your family." Jonathan felt his blood run cold. "Connection to my family? How?" "Your company supplied uniforms for the mill, but the uniforms that arrived were different from those that were paid for. Larger amounts, different specifications. It was as if your company was being used to launder money without your knowledge." The revelation hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut. "Are you saying that I unknowingly was involved in the scheme?" "Not you personally, but your company, yes. Someone was manipulating your contracts to use your reputation as a facade for illegal operations." "Who? Who in my company had access to the contracts?" Susan hesitated before answering. "According to the documents I saw, the changes were always approved by Robert." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert, the friend of 20 years, the accountant he trusted blindly, could have been involved in the scheme from the beginning. "No," said Jonathan finally. "Robert wouldn't do that. He's helping us. He risked his own career to take the documents to Harrisburg." "Or he's trying to control what the investigators discover," suggested Susan gently. "Think about it. He always knew exactly what to do. He always had the right answers. He always appeared at the right time." The doubt planted by Susan began to grow in Jonathan's mind. Mentally reviewing the events of the past weeks, he began to notice inconsistencies in Robert's behavior that he hadn't noticed before. "He knew about the diary even before Lily found it," Jonathan murmured. "When she showed the notebook, he wasn't surprised as he should have been." "And he was the first to suggest that you look for evidence in the backyard," added Susan. "As if he knew there was something buried there." That morning, Jonathan made a difficult decision. He called Dr. Matthews and shared his suspicions about Robert. "Doctor, I need to report something that may be important to the investigation." "What kind of information?" "Suspicions about my accountant, Robert Silver. I believe he may be involved in the corruption scheme." "What evidence do you have?" Jonathan told him about Susan's revelations and his own observations about Robert's suspicious behavior. "We'll investigate," promised Dr. Matthews, "but I need to warn you, if your suspicions are correct, you may be in greater danger than we imagined." "Why?" "Because Robert knows exactly where you are hiding." The realization hit Jonathan like lightning. If Robert was indeed involved in the scheme, he had given the location of the safe house to the same criminals who were trying to silence them. "Doctor, we need to get out of here now." "Calm down. I'm going to send a team to escort you to another location. In the meantime, keep the doors locked and don't answer anyone who isn't from our team." Jonathan woke Susan and explained the situation. Together, they went to Lily's room, who was sleeping soundly, hugging her teddy bear. "Lily," whispered Susan, shaking her gently. "Sweetie, we need to wake up." "Mommy, is it time for breakfast?" "No, dear, we're going on a trip, an adventure." "Where to?" "To an even safer place," replied Jonathan. "Remember I promised I would always protect you? Well, sometimes protecting means leaving a place quickly." Lily, still sleepy but trusting in the adults who cared for her, got up and began to pack her few belongings. "Uncle Jonathan," she said as she put her teddy bear in her backpack, "did the bad people find out where we were?" They may have found out, yes, but we can always hide from them, right? Always, he promised, although he didn't know if he would be able to keep that promise. While waiting for the rescue team, they heard the sound of cars approaching the house. Jonathan peeked through the curtain and saw two dark vehicles parking outside. "They're not from our team," he whispered to Susan. "They're unmarked cars." From the first car stepped a figure that Jonathan recognized immediately. Robert Silver, accompanied by two men he didn't know. The betrayal was confirmed, and now they were cornered in a dead-end house, with Lily depending on them for her safety. "Mummy," whispered Lily, realizing the tension, "why are you and Uncle Jonathan scared?" It was a question for which there was no answer that a 6-year-old could understand. All they could do was pray that the rescue team would arrive before it was too late. The knock on the door echoed through the silent house like a hammer against Jonathan's heart. Robert knew his habits well. He knew that he always answered promptly when someone arrived. The accountant's familiar voice cut through the wood of the front door. "Jonathan, open the door. I need to talk to you urgently about the investigation." Susan held Lily against her chest, the girl trembling even without fully understanding the danger. The three hid behind the living room sofa, away from the windows where they could be seen. "Jonathan, I know you're in there," continued Robert. "The situation has changed. Barbara has been found and she's negotiating. She said you knew about everything from the beginning." The silence stretched. Jonathan knew Robert was trying to force him to respond, to reveal himself. The accusation about Barbara could be true or a lie. There was no way to know. "If you don't open this door," Robert's voice became harsher, "my friends here will have to open it for us. And that could get unpleasant for all of you." It was then that Lily did something unexpected. She whispered to Jonathan, "Uncle Jonathan, there's a door in the back of the house. I saw it when I was playing outside." Jonathan looked at her, surprised. In the midst of fear, the girl had observed details that the adults hadn't noticed. He nodded, indicating that they should try to escape through the back. Moving silently, the three headed towards the rear of the house. Jonathan carefully tested the handle of the back door. It was unlocked. Outside, they could hear Robert still talking loudly at the front door, trying to keep them distracted. "Lily," whispered Susan, "can you be very brave and very quiet at the same time?" The girl nodded solemnly, "like when I played hide-and-seek with you back when we didn't have a house." The reference to their difficult past deeply touched Susan. Lily had learned to be silent and invisible during the months they had lived on the streets, skills that could now save them. They left through the back and began to move towards a nearby forest. Jonathan carried Lily so that her steps wouldn't make noise, while Susan followed close behind. They managed to get about 50 yards away from the house when they heard the sound of glass breaking. "They're in," murmured Jonathan. Hidden behind a large tree, they could see Robert and the two men rummaging through the house through the illuminated windows. The search was methodical, professional. They weren't just hired thugs. They were people with experience in finding fugitives. "Uncle Jonathan," whispered Lily in his ear, "there's a road down there. I saw it when we arrived." Jonathan looked in the direction she was pointing. There was indeed a secondary road about 200 yards down the forest. If they could get there, maybe they would find some vehicle passing. But when they started down the slope, they heard voices behind them. Robert had discovered that they had escaped and was organizing a search. "Spread out," they heard his voice clearly. "They can't have gone far with a child." The mention of Lily made Jonathan squeeze the girl tighter in his arms. Susan held his free hand, completely trusting him to guide them to safety. They reached the road just as headlights of a truck appeared on the curve. Jonathan came out of the trees and waved desperately. The trucker, a middle-aged man with a kind face, stopped immediately. "What's going on, buddy?" "Please help us. We're running from dangerous people. We have a child." The trucker looked at Lily, who stared at him with her big, frightened eyes, and didn't hesitate. "Get in the back. I'll take you to town." As the truck drove away on the dark road, Jonathan finally had time to process what had happened. Robert, his friend of 20 years, had tried to hand them over to criminals. The betrayal cut deep, even more than the physical danger they had faced. "Uncle Jonathan," said Lily, wrapped in a tarp that the trucker had given to protect her from the cold. "Why did Mr. Robert become a bad person?" "Sometimes, Lily, people make bad choices because they want things they can't have honestly. Money, power, things like that." "But he was your friend." "I thought he was." "And now we can't trust him anymore?" Lily's simple question touched on something fundamental about trust and betrayal that Jonathan was struggling to process. "No, Princess, we can't trust him anymore." "But we can still trust each other, right?" "Always," replied Susan, hugging her daughter. "We'll always be able to trust each other." The trucker dropped them off at the bus station in Gettysburg. Jonathan called Dr. Matthews from a public phone, reporting what had happened. "Thank God you're okay," said the prosecutor. "Robert Silver was arrested an hour ago. We managed to intercept communications from him with Barbara Fuller. So she was found? She was, and she's negotiating a plea bargain. But there's something you need to know. Robert wasn't just working for the local scheme. He had connections with a much larger corruption network. What does that mean for us? It means you're not completely safe yet, but it also means that your cooperation has become even more valuable to justice." 3 hours later, an official team transferred them to a new safe house, this time in Lancaster, under much more rigorous protection. Lily slept throughout the trip, exhausted by the tension of the day. "Mommy," she murmured when she woke up in the new house, "are we going to have to keep hiding forever?" "No, sweetie, only until all the bad people are arrested." "And how long will that take?" Susan looked at Jonathan, both asking themselves the same question. Dr. Matthews had said that the investigation could take months to be completed, considering the national extent of the scheme. "Lily," said Jonathan, sitting down next to her, "do you remember when you found that first little box buried in the backyard?" "I remember. Did you know you were going to find something important?" "No, I just knew there was something different in that place." "Well, sometimes in life we don't know how long things are going to take. We only know that if we're brave and stay together, in the end, everything will be okay." "Like in the endings of the stories that Mommy tells me?" "Exactly like in the endings of the stories." That night, while Lily slept safely for the first time in days, Jonathan and Susan talked about the future. "Jonathan, there's something I need to say," began Susan. "All these weeks living together, taking care of Lily as a family, have changed something in me. They've changed something in me too. What are we going to do when all this is over? Lily has gotten used to you as a father figure. I've gotten used to, well, to not being alone in this responsibility." Jonathan took her hand. "Susan, these last weeks have been the most meaningful of my life. Not just because I found a purpose, but because I found a family." "A real family?" "The only real family I've ever known. And if Lily agrees, I think she agreed a long time ago. She calls me Uncle Jonathan, as if I've always been part of her life." From the next room, they heard Lily's sleepy voice. "Are you talking about me?" They laughed softly, caught red-handed. "We're talking about our family," replied Susan. "Is our family going to stay together forever?" "If you want to," said Jonathan. I want to very much." For the first time in weeks, everyone fell asleep with genuine hope in their hearts. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they would face together, as a family, any challenge that arose. 6 months later, an unexpected revelation completely changed the understanding of everything that had happened. Jonathan, Susan, and Lily were finally back in the Yellow House in Harmony Creek, which had been restored during the period they were under protection. The city was still recovering from the scandal that resulted in the arrest of 15 people, including former Mayor Godfrey Miller and Barbara Fuller. Dr. Matthews visited them on a sunny afternoon in March, bringing with him documents that revealed the most surprising truth of the entire story. "There's something you need to know about the documents that Lily found buried," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table where it all had begun. "Our investigation discovered who buried them there." "Who was it?" asked Jonathan, curious. "Joseph Parker, the former owner of this land. He was an accountant for the city hall itself 15 years ago." Susan's eyes widened. "Parker? Like my last name?" "Exactly. Joseph Parker was your uncle, your father's brother. He discovered the corruption scheme when he was still working for the city hall and began to document everything secretly." "My uncle? But my parents never mentioned having a brother." "Because Joseph had to fake his own death to escape persecution. When he realized he had been discovered, he staged a car accident and disappeared. But before that, he buried all the evidence here in the backyard." Lily, who was playing on the floor near the adults, raised her head. "Was the man who buried the treasures Mommy's family?" "He was. Yes, sweetie. Your great-uncle. And he buried the things so that someone from the family would find them." Dr. Matthews smiled. "Very smart, Lily. He left specific clues so that only someone from the Parker family could find the documents. That's why they were buried exactly in the spots where a child playing would naturally discover them." The revelation explained many coincidences that had intrigued Jonathan. Why did Robert know the property so well? Why had he suggested looking for evidence in the backyard? The answer was simpler and more tragic than any conspiracy. Robert, the accountant, was complicit in the scheme, but the documents had been placed there by someone who wanted the truth to be discovered. "There's more," Dr. Michael Harding continued. "Joseph left a letter for any family member who found the documents. It was sealed inside a glass capsule we found where Lily discovered the first treasure. He handed a yellowed letter to Susan, who opened it with trembling hands. The handwriting was elegant, like someone accustomed to writing official reports. "To whoever finds these documents," Susan read aloud, "I hope it's someone from the Parker family, because you're the only people I can trust to do the right thing. I've discovered that our town has been robbed for years by people who are supposed to protect it. I can't stay silent anymore, but I also can't face this alone. If you're reading this, it means the time has come for the truth to come to light. Be brave, be fair, and remember, sometimes the best people are those who help us when we need it most, even if they're strangers." Susan stopped reading, moved. "He knew I'd need help. He knew I couldn't do this alone." "And that's why you met," Dr. Michael Harding said, looking at Jonathan. "Joseph left the evidence here because he knew your father was an honest man. He hoped that when the time came, you two would unite to fight corruption. Did my father know Joseph? They were close friends. Joseph even helped your father buy this land for a fair price when others were trying to cheat him." Jonathan felt a deep emotion taking over him. His father, who had died without knowing the extent of the corruption in the town, had been protected by Joseph. And now, years later, that protection extended to him and the family he had made. "There's more in the letter," Susan said, continuing to read. "I know that whoever finds this may be suffering injustices, may be persecuted, or may have lost everything for trying to do what is right. Don't give up. Good people always find a way to protect each other. And remember, the greatest treasure is not money or power, but the family we choose, and that chooses us back." Lily approached her. "Mother, Mommy, did great-uncle Joseph know we were going to become a family?" "I think he hoped good things would happen when the truth was discovered," Susan replied, hugging her daughter. Dr. Michael Harding stood up to leave, but before he did, he turned to Lily. "Little one, you know you're a hero, don't you?" I Yes, because of the treasures you found, dozens of people who were being robbed will get their money back. Schools will be built with the recovered money. Hospitals will have new equipment. And no one else will be fired from their job for discovering bad things. Not if we are vigilant and brave like you were. After Dr. Michael Harding left, the family gathered in the backyard where it had all begun. The tree under which Lily had found the first treasure was in bloom, and birds were singing in its branches. "Susan," Jonathan said, "there's something I've wanted to ask you for months." "What is it?" "Will you marry me? Not just to give legal security to our family, but because you and Lily are the best thing that's ever happened to me." Susan smiled, tears in her eyes. "Jonathan Harding, you saved me when I needed it most. You gave me dignity when I had lost everything. And more importantly, you gave my daughter a father she never had. Is that a yes?" "It's a yes. With one condition." "What?" "That when Lily grows up, she can choose if she wants you to officially adopt her. I want her to have a voice in that decision." Lily, who had listened to the whole conversation, ran to hug both of them. "I've already chosen. I want Uncle Jonathan to be my real daddy." "Are you sure, Princess?" "I am. You protect me, you love me, and you make Mommy smile. Isn't that what daddies do?" "That's exactly what daddies do," Jonathan replied, moved. That night, as they prepared dinner together in the kitchen that had become the heart of their home, Lily made an observation that perfectly summarized their entire journey. "Daddy Jonathan," she said, testing the new name, "I think Great-Uncle Joseph buried the treasure so I could find you." "How so, my flower?" "He knew I would need a family, and he knew you would need me too, so he put the treasures where I would play, so that when I found them, you two would meet." Jonathan and Susan exchanged glances, impressed once again with the little girl's wisdom. "You know what, Lily?" Susan said. "I think you're right. I think all this was planned long before we were born. And now we are a real family forever?" "Forever," they both promised in unison. 6 months later, in a simple but moving ceremony at St. Anthony's Church in Harmony Creek, Jonathan and Susan were married. Lily was the flower girl, wearing a white dress with yellow flowers that she had chosen herself. Mrs. Davis was the maid of honor, and Dr. Michael Harding was the best man. But the real surprise of the ceremony was the appearance of an elderly man with completely white hair who approached the family after the celebration. "Susan," he said with a choked voice, "my name is Joseph Parker, your uncle." The silence that followed was one of pure emotion. Joseph had managed to return after all the criminals were arrested, and now he could finally meet the niece he had tried to protect from afar. "Lily," he said, kneeling down to the girl's height, "thank you for finding my treasures. You saved our town." "And you helped us become a family," Lily replied, hugging the great-uncle she had just met. In that moment, under the golden sun of a Pennsylvania afternoon, everyone knew that some stories don't end. They turn into new beginnings, full of hope and true love. A year after the wedding, life in the Yellow House had found its perfect rhythm. Lily, now 7 years old, attended the local school where she was affectionately known as the girl who saved the town. She had developed a special passion for mathematics, a clear inheritance from her mother, and for detective stories, inspired by her own experience as a discoverer of mysteries. Jonathan had rebuilt his business, but now with a completely different perspective. The 3 bakeries operated not only as businesses, but as community centers where people in need could find work and support. Susan managed all the administrative aspects, applying her accounting expertise to ensure everything worked with complete transparency. "Daddy Jonathan," Lily said on a sunny April morning, while helping to organize the bread in the display case, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, Princess." "What secret?" "Yesterday, when I was playing in the backyard, I found one more thing buried." Jonathan stopped what he was doing, intrigued. It had been months since Joseph's last discovery, and everyone thought there was nothing more hidden on the property. What kind of thing? A small box, but this one is different from the others. Different how? It doesn't have papers or documents, it has other things. Lily ran to get her discovery, returning with a small hand-carved wooden box. Inside, there were some personal items, old photographs, a wedding ring, and a letter with a woman's delicate handwriting. "This isn't from Great-Uncle Joseph," Susan observed, examining the letter. "It's from a woman." Jonathan picked up one of the photographs. It showed a young couple smiling in front of the yellow house, which at the time was painted light blue. The man looked vaguely familiar, but he couldn't quite place him. "Look at the date on the back of the photo," Susan said. 1987. 3 years before my father bought this house, Jonathan calculated. Susan carefully opened the letter, which was well preserved inside a plastic envelope. "To whoever finds this time capsule," she read, "my name is Maria Parker, and I lived in this house with my husband Joseph for 2 of the happiest years of my life. We are burying these memories because we need to leave in a hurry. But we want to leave a piece of our love in this place that was our home." "Parker," Jonathan murmured. "Maria Parker. Could she have been Uncle Joseph's wife?" "Keep reading," Lily urged, fascinated by another mystery. "If anyone is reading this, it means this house has once again become home to a happy family. I hope you have found here the same peace and joy that we found. We also leave our wedding ring, not because we didn't love it, but because we wanted this place to forever hold proof that true love existed here." The letter continued with details about the dreams Maria and Joseph had for that house, that it would always be a home for families who needed a fresh start, that its walls would witness more stories of love and overcoming. "And if by chance our family grows in the future," Susan continued, "may our children or grandchildren know that their grandparents planted here seeds of hope that have blossomed in lives we don't even know." Lily clapped her hands, moved. "Does that mean the house was blessed twice, once by Great-Uncle Joseph and once by Great-Aunt Maria?" "It seems so," Jonathan replied, still processing all the implications. That afternoon, they decided to visit Joseph, who had settled in a small house near downtown Harmony Creek. The elderly man received the news about the discovery of the time capsule with tears in his eyes. "Maria," he whispered, holding the ring with trembling hands. "My dear Maria, I didn't know she had buried this before we left." "Were you married?" Susan asked gently. "For 2 wonderful years. But when I discovered the corruption at City Hall, and our lives were in danger, she decided to leave to protect the baby we were expecting." "Baby?" Jonathan leaned forward. "Maria was pregnant when we had to separate. She went to Harrisburg, and I faked my death here. We never met again, but I learned years later that she had a girl." Susan felt a chill run down her spine. "A girl born in what year?" 1988. "Why?" "Because I was born in 1988, in Harrisburg, and my mother's name was Maria Parker." The silence that followed was charged with a revelation impossible to ignore. Joseph observed Susan carefully, looking for similarities that now jumped to the eye. "Your eyes," he murmured. "You have Maria's eyes. And the way you smile, too. Does that mean—" Susan couldn't finish the sentence. "It means that Lily is not only my great-niece," Joseph said, tears streaming down his face. "She's my granddaughter, and you're my daughter." The discovery completely transformed the family dynamics. Lily, who had already gained a father in Jonathan, now discovered she had a real grandfather. Susan, who had grown up believing she was an orphan, discovered she still had a living father. "Grandpa Joseph," Lily said, trying out the new name. "Does that mean you buried the treasures so I would find you?" I think so, my little granddaughter. I think destiny worked to reunite our family. And now we're an even bigger family. Much bigger, confirmed Jonathan, touched by the perfect complexity of how their lives intertwined. 2 months later, in a special ceremony at the Harmony Creek Courthouse, Jonathan formalized the adoption of Lily. The girl chose to keep the last name Parker as well, officially becoming Lily Parker Harding. "Now I have 2 last names," she said proudly to everyone who would listen. "One from the family that found me, and one from the family that was always mine." And the story of the Parker Harding family became a legend in Harmony Creek. The Yellow House became known as the House of Miracles, where a lost girl found a family, where buried documents saved an entire town, and where true love proved to be stronger than any adversity. Mrs. Davis, who had followed the entire journey from day one, used to say to the bakery's customers, "That girl didn't just find buried treasures, she found the greatest treasure of all, a family that chose each other." On warm summer afternoons, Lily still played in the backyard where it all began, but now she was no longer looking for hidden treasures. She was planting flowers with her grandfather Joseph, helping her mother Susan with the bakery numbers, and learning from her daddy Jonathan about how to care for people who need help. "You know, Daddy," she said one of those afternoons, "I don't think we needed to find all those treasures to be happy." "Why do you think that?" "Because the real treasure has always been here." She pointed to her heart. "It was the love we already had for each other. We just didn't know it yet." Jonathan hugged his daughter, knowing that she had articulated with childish perfection the deepest truth of their entire journey. They hadn't just found evidence of corruption buried in a backyard. They had found each other and discovered that family isn't about blood or social conventions, but about choosing to love and protect people who come into our lives when we need them most. That night, as the family dined together in the kitchen of the Yellow House, Lily made one last request that sealed everyone's happiness forever. "Can I make a toast?" "Of course," Susan said, raising her glass of juice. "A toast to the buried treasures that made us find each other, and a toast to our family, which is the greatest treasure anyone can have." "Cheers," they all said in unison, toasting not only to the past that brought them there, but mainly to the future they would build together, day after day, as the family they chose to be. And so, in a small town in Pennsylvania, a story that began with suffering and injustice ended with the sweetest victory of all, the certainty that true love always finds a way to flourish, even in the most unlikely soils.